Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. This is Reading with Your Kids. We are beaming out to you and the entire planet from the beautiful, historical, book-loving neighborhood of Reedville, the loveliest neighborhood in all of Boston. I'm a firm believer that families that read together grow together. Every time we sit down to share a story, we're building stronger bonds, sparking creativity, and planting seeds of kindness in young hearts. I love the mission of Reading with Your Kids, and I love introducing you to fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. You can help our mission by spreading the word. Let your family and friends know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, YouTube. Wherever you find your favorite shows, you can find Reading with Your Kids. Really important conversation today. First up, Priten Soundar Shah is here to celebrate his book, Ethical EdTech. This really is a fascinating conversation talking about technology and how it's being used in our classrooms. Later in the show, Barbie Girl will be here to celebrate her debut picture book called Lily's Big Question. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by Fart Boy and Reeky Dog Dino Doom. Fantastic new graphic novel written by New York Times bestselling author Joan Holub, who's written over 200 amazing books for kids. It's school sleepover at the museum. What could go wrong? Well, how about this? A snack-fueled explosion of garbanzo beans and peanuts unleashes a stink so powerful it brings the dinosaurs back to life. Now, Fart Boy, Reeky Dog, and their friends are in the middle of a dino-sized disaster. They have to solve tricky riddles, find missing bones, and stop the stinkiest villain of all, Professor Gravy Pants. Because if they don't, the dinosaurs could take over. Or worse, they could become Dino Dinner. This action-packed graphic novel is bursting with friendships, adventure, and enough laughs to shake the museum walls. If your kids love superheroes, if they love dinosaurs, and if they love to laugh until they can't breathe, then Fart Boy and Reeky Dog Dino Doom is the book for you. Because sometimes the power to save the world comes from the unlikeliest place. Grab your copy today and get ready for a reading adventure that's truly dynamite. Joining us from not too far away from my childhood home in the suburbs of Boston, our guest is here today to celebrate his new book. It's pretty important. Ethical EdTech. Please welcome to the show, Priten Soundar Shah. Priten, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? And thank you so much for having me today.
You're welcome. And I pronounced your first name correctly? Okay, excellent. Excellent. Tell me about ethical EdTech. I think everybody is talking about this. It's a super important topic, especially now that AI is dominating all parts of our culture. Just give us a basic introduction to the book, please.
Yeah. So, the book is a combination of all my different experiences. And that spans everything from my undergraduate degree in philosophy, a master's in policy, experience building, education technology tools. I'm a developer as well, classroom experience. And, it largely takes a stance that we're letting the technology itself dictate way too much of how we approach these decisions in our schools about when and when not to use technology. And instead, we kind of need to return to our roots of thinking about why are we teaching our students and what do I want for them?
Yeah, I was really surprised to read not too long ago an article that said that when laptops started coming into the classrooms and everybody it was really celebrated. Oh, this is going to be such a breakthrough. Kids are going to be learning so much better, so much more. And now we're finding studies that saying that test scores have dropped significantly since the introduction of laptops in the classroom.
That's right. I think we placed a lot of faith in just spending more on technology and hoping that that would produce results. And I think we're starting to see that that's not enough for our students. I think the laptops is definitely one perfect example of that. It's a little bit more complicated, I think, sometimes because obviously when we're studying these kinds of things, the pandemic ends up being a big factor in terms of how our students are performing post COVID, because obviously that really threw off a generation of students. And so I think there's some folks who are still trying to figure out exactly what the data conclusively says in terms of why those test scores are going down. But at the least, we know that technology didn't really help them go up.
Yeah. Is it the case that, because I remember my beautiful wife taught in the Boston Public Schools for over 34 years. And while there was some training when different pieces of tech were introduced, it certainly wasn't extensive. It was a little bit better than back in the pandemic days when teachers said, hey, next week you're going to start working on Zoom. And my wife came in and said, what in the heck is Zoom? But it wasn't all that much better. Was that a big part of the problem?
Yeah, I do think that that was a part of the problem and continues to be, which is that oftentimes districts, individual schools will make contracts with these technology companies. But getting teachers to both understand how to use the tools, when to use them, what's the the most effective ways to integrate it, and whether or not the teachers actually think it's the best way for their own classrooms, those kinds of things are not really part of the conversation. And I think that the pandemic example is great because that was a temporary moment, right? So we had a massive shift in how much technology had to be used. It went from almost nothing in some classrooms to everything. And at that point, schools tried to, provide some training, some guidance, but they got away with, basically putting some band-aids on because we all knew, that this would come to an end. And so I think there was some level of let's just get through the pandemic and then, at least we'll get back to normalcy afterwards. Now what we're seeing is that AI is introducing those drastic changes, for technology, for society, for how our students are approaching these things. On a pretty regular basis. So it's not just one, March 2020 event that's been there for a few years. It's every couple of weeks, there's a new development that changes how teachers need to think about their classrooms. And we're trying to do band-aids in some situations and that's not working. And I think that that's really the struggle here is we need to catch everybody up, not only to what's, has happened over the last, by 2023 when ChatGPT initially became popular, but what's happening, what happened this week in the AI space. And that's a huge burden.
Yeah, it absolutely. I remember the thing that frustrated me about the pandemic the most is that they threw this at teachers and very little training, if any. But meanwhile, there are online schools that exist. And I was banging my head saying, why aren't we borrowing some of the technology that we know works instead of asking teachers to start from scratch?
Yeah, that's right. And I think, it's hard because a lot of these tech solutions are so dependent on the exact teacher and student population, that it is oftentimes even hard to figure out where to start. And so, like an online school that's opt-in, for high school students is very different than suddenly getting, the Boston public school system to be online, because now you're dealing with, students whose home environments were not set up for the technology, who maybe don't feel as motivated or as excited with technology, who are dependent on other support services within a school building, that they can't get just through a Zoom call. And so, I do think that this is a challenge. And I think that the American education system in particular is, not well set up to deal with these challenges. And partly it's because of the circumstances. We have very, very diverse schools across the country with very different contexts, with very different, political contexts as well, different funding levels. There's just so many different factors that I think it makes it very hard for us to come up with a strategy that works across the board. Which means even when we try to learn from other schools, there's only so much we can gain from that.
Good points. Tell me, what was the moment that informed you that, hey, I need to write this book?
Yeah. So this is my second book on the topic, but the first one was very different. So my first book came out in 2023, and that was meant to help teachers kind of get caught up on AI. And it was supposed to explain all of the different possibilities that AI brings for education, whether it be helping make lesson plans or figure out different ways to use it for direct student instruction, and also talk about the risks that we need to think about as the technology continues to grow. As time went on, what I realized was even when we were sort of getting teachers caught up on the technology, it was still really hard to get schools to make decisions that were grounded not in, the latest headlines or what the sales pitches were from education technology companies, but in fact from like what our teachers thought were right for the classrooms. And so the book hopes to create a shared vocabulary so that we can talk about when is it right to use technology, what are the risks that we ought to consider in these situations, and how do we weigh all of that? Because the tricky part with education is that a lot of the decisions usually means we have to sacrifice something. So it's not, there's no one decision that's going to mean that we maximize everything that's good that is possible for our school district. It will mean that we'll have to give up on some things, and navigating those kinds of dilemmas where you're trying to figure out, okay, like what sacrifices are we willing to make, and why? That requires some training and thinking about ethics. And it requires everybody to kind of be willing to have those conversations and slow down enough to come to a, consensus before contracts are signed.
What are some of the sacrifices that you're thinking about?
Yeah. So there are a couple of examples that I can start with. The first one is when you think about, imagine we have this AI tutor, and we have good research that it shows that when students engage with it, all of their test scores go up. We see their science test scores, their reading and writing test scores, and their math test scores go up. And so we think, that's a great opportunity. We've been really struggling to get test scores up in our district, so why don't we, give all of our students the opportunity to engage with this tutor during class time? But at the same time, you realize 2 to 3 months in that you're noticing that the students themselves are, their relationships with each other are changing. And so they're not as active, in the lunchroom anymore. They're not, trying to stay after school and talk to each other. They're not reaching for help from each other in the class. The classes are just less talkative in general because they're spending even more time on screens than they already do. And there you would now have a dilemma of, you're noticing that academically they're all getting much stronger, but they might be losing something in terms of their social emotional development. And so how do you weigh that? How do you decide how important is those relationships that they form with their peers? What is that going to do to the long-term development versus all these gains that we're seeing on skill sets that we know we want our students to have? And so that's just, there's tons of these tiny examples that oftentimes, we think big picture about, screen time or no screen time, cell phone bans, no cell phone bans, the AI ban, right? Like it becomes very like all or nothing. But oftentimes the real decisions that I think a lot of folks are struggling with are much more nuanced and tiny, and about particular interventions, and not just, do we allow a computer in class or not, right? It is about like, do we use this particular tool or not? When do we use it? How much do we use it? And I think we really need, systems to think about that at that level, because otherwise we get what we've seen over the last at least 3 years, which is all or nothing conversations. And even today we're seeing a lot of schools now and states, in fact, debate, banning, having, any technology in schools. And so they're debating whether or not we should have the one-to-one device program. And I think over the last few years, it was initially trying to ban AI, platforms from school devices, and cell phone bans, and figuring out whether or not students were allowed to bring phones to schools. But it is really, because it's so complex, I think oftentimes we're adopting this all or nothing mindset and not thinking about maybe there's some trade-off that we need to accept, and some that we're not willing to tolerate.
It's interesting. A lot of the authors that we've had here on the podcast are educators. And as I said, my beautiful wife taught school. One of the things that I noticed, and I presented education magic shows in school, so I had a chance to literally visit thousands of schools over 35 years. And one of the things I noticed was kind of what you were saying. It's all or nothing. They would have a program say a phonics program to teach kids reading, and someone would say, hey, this isn't working for everybody, so we're going to throw that out and then bring in this whole new system. And then we find out 8 years later, well, it's working for some kids, but it's not working for these. And so we throw it out again and it's like, you guys are supposed to be smart. You're supposed to be educators. Why can't you understand that every kid works differently, and let's work with what works with this kid and do something else for the kids it doesn't work with.
Right. Yeah. And I think that this is when I think about some of the things that are causing these problems to last so long, it is that we don't adopt this like experimenting mindset in a way that is productive. And so we run lots of experiments on our students on a regular basis, and some of them we ought to think carefully about, like when we introduce tools where we don't have enough research on the impact of them on our students. We don't really want an entire school to become the guinea pigs for those experiments. But also when we have some data, there's ways to like build micro pilots and figure out, okay, like, is this actually going to work for my school, for my student population? Because oftentimes, you see this big picture data, and the tool comes in and says, oh, like, we have this evidence that reading scores go up by 20%. And then when you really dig in, it turns out, oh, well, they only really tested a really affluent district, and they only tested one class that was their AP class, right? Like, those kinds of things really make a difference when you're then trying to extrapolate that information and use it in your own school district. Now, are you always going to get data that's exactly your school's context? Of course not, right? Like that's unreasonable to expect that we'll have, perfect research data that matches the school's context. But then that's where the school can say, we're not going to commit to something for 8 months for the entire school. Let's try this out for just the fall for one class and see where it goes. And then there is this like all students or no students mentality. And I think that some of that's just the nature of like contracts, right? And so some of it's very difficult to figure out like how we're going to have 3 different tools for all our different students, and how do we make sure that teachers don't have to learn 3 different tools if we know different tools work for different students. But sometimes it's also like there's this mentality of, how are we going to, it's very test score focused. And so it's whatever is going to get our test scores elevated. And so that means that, more students are going to benefit from this platform, even if our most struggling students end up not benefiting. Sometimes those decisions get made like that, and that's unfortunate. And I know, we can talk about how unfortunate it is, but there's lots of deeper problems than any individual decision maker. How funding is tied in the country, how schools are ranked, all of those things definitely impact why people feel the urge to do that. But it creates all these incentive structures where you're not really thinking as concretely about what our individual students need. And how do we best maximize that? And it does become, what is going to keep our funding for the next year.
Yeah. You mentioned the word data. Who should be in control and owning the data about our kids?
Yeah. My ideal answer would be that students and parents can control their own data, but we realistically, we don't do that for existing tools. And I think as AI continues to grow, we're going to, have to more and more figure out what level of data we're willing to provide other parties. And data is interesting because there's a lot of different layers to this, right? So we have federal regulations about how data has to be managed. And so there's regulations about who has access to it, and how long the companies have to retain it, and what it can be used for and not used for. And oftentimes, like FERPA is the go-to standard by which a lot of school districts will evaluate different technology companies and see if it's adherent to that. But oftentimes our law establishes a baseline, but doesn't really figure out what the maximal protections are, because our legal system isn't built to, be that draconian. And so we leave a lot of those decisions up to individual actors. And so this is where an individual school kind of has to decide, well, this tool is asking for all this data, but does it actually need all this data to do what we need it to do, right? So like maybe the tool is capable of doing 20 things. We're only going to be using it for this one thing, and then it doesn't need all these 20 different data sets that it collects about our students. And right now, we're not very good at having those conversations. And again, partially it's because no one has the time to have those conversations. The decisions are made rushed, and the technology moves so quickly that by the time you're, figuring out signing a new contract, like you don't have the time to keep up with, how much new data is this tool collecting? It's all going to become more and more necessary. This is where, again, like it becomes about the trade-off, because we as adults all decide what level of data privacy we're willing to sacrifice for some sort of benefit, right? So when you and I decide that we're going to make a Facebook account and post pictures of our lunch every day, we've decided that, Facebook having access to those pictures is worth being in touch with, our long lost family and our, friends from high school. And we say, okay, like I'm going to give up some of my privacy because it's worth it to me to maintain those connections with people that I otherwise wouldn't maintain connections with. But we're doing that as adults, right? So, and we're making those decisions for ourselves. Now, when schools are making those decisions on behalf of our students, that's where it becomes much more tricky. How much say do we give minors, in how much data they are allowed to and not allowed to give? At what point do we inform parents, and how much, opt in, opt out rights do we give the parents on this? And then how do we balance that? Because as AI thrives on data. The reason that the most effective things it can do, it only does when it has more data on you, right? So the more information that AI has on our students, the more likely that we can gain some of the benefits of the technologies, especially the ones that everybody's really excited about. But that's at the cost of giving up some of our students' data privacy. And so, it's up to us to figure out how much of this is really so great in terms of the benefits that we will give that data up. And then how much of this is we're going to have to figure this out and let everybody make their own call. And again, that's difficult, right? Because if you have some students whose parents say, oh, this is fine, I'd love my student to use this tool, others who say no, it makes classroom management really difficult. But at the same time, we owe parents that right to decide if they're willing to expose their students to the risks of that data being shared or not.
Is part of the problem, well, you mentioned, that the technology is just growing by leaps and bounds, and what AI is doing today is going to change next week or the week after, and those changes are incredible. But is part of the problem also that the people making decisions aren't really all that knowledgeable in this area? They haven't, that a superintendent of schools was a teacher, a math teacher maybe at one time, and kind of grew up, and the furthest thing from his or her mind was technology and how much should we use in a classroom.
Yeah. So, my go-to example on this question oftentimes is that we did a lot of work with schools during the pandemic to help them transition to online learning. And at that point, a lot of our trainings ended up being things like, how do you, kick someone out of a Zoom call? How do you mute and unmute? How do you mute someone who has background noise going on? And, today that seems very intuitive to most of us, like, oh, how do you join a Zoom call? And how do you mute and unmute yourself? And, but during, the 2020 pandemic, a lot of teachers across the country were using these tools for the very first time. A lot of students were using them for the very first time. And that level of tech literacy wasn't there. We had to build that up for something that now seems a little mundane, and self-explanatory, but it was not. And 2-3 years later, you're now dealing with a massive leap in how much you're expecting everybody in education to know about technology. Like, you go from muting and unmuting a Zoom call to knowing what an algorithm is and data bias and, what is artificial intelligence and reinforcement learning and what's the difference between generative AI and not. I mean, these are very, very complex topics that just were not, common knowledge. It was never necessary. Some of it wasn't existent. And so now you have all sorts of people who need to be trained on the technology, whether it be the highest levels of our school district leadership, to parents, to teachers, to individual students. And so there is a huge catch-up game we're playing right now that to build that tech literacy. And that's a lot of the work that's happening in the field right now from folks who are trying to make some difference here, is helping everybody kind of understand what is the bare minimum that you need to know about the technology to make good policies on it. And that, that's requiring some time to catch everybody up.
So in ethical ed tech, what is your goal with this book to kind of, obviously it's not to train people how to use the technology. I'm imagining, because by the time the book is published, it's obsolete. What is the ultimate goal of the book?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The book does not try to train anybody on any technology. It instead tries to figure out how do we actually make the decisions about any technology, and when it's appropriate and not appropriate to use in schools. And the book is really relevant for both educators and school leadership. And so it's not just for like school policies, it's also for classroom policies and individual decisions. And the reason that this requires a book is that AI ethics, ethics in education, all of those things are buzzwords, and you hear them a lot, especially now when like ethics and AI are so, so much a part of the public narrative. But also, we've spent thousands of years trying to define ethics as humans, and we have an entire disciplines around it. And folks have devoted their entire careers to figuring out how do we ask ethical questions in society. And so the book's goal is, what is the bare minimum skill set that I can take from philosophy and policy making, and bring it into the conversation with education and technology so that we can have real conversations about this that isn't just buzzwords. And so, oftentimes especially when we think about AI ethics, the folks go to the very, very obvious things because that's, again, there's no training provided on how to think more deeply about it. And so they'll say things like, data privacy will come up about making sure students' data is safeguarded. Bias will come up, right? So there's these concerns that are coming up that are real, but it's still not getting to the nuance of what is good for my school, what is good for my students, how do I decide how to weigh these costs and benefits, and that's because that requires vocabulary, that requires a skill set. You need to know how to actually talk about these things, and you need policies that support that, right? So of course we can talk about it all day long. But our schools also need to figure out what sort of guidance are they going to provide that helps teachers make these decisions, that helps them figure out, what is appropriate for our students to do and what is appropriate for our faculty to do and our teachers to do. And the book navigates those kinds of questions. It tries to help folks build that skill set, and ask the right questions so that we can come up with the right answers for our individual schools. The other thing it doesn't do is I don't say it's always right to do this one particular thing in it. Like, this is the ethical way to do things. And largely because I don't think that exists, right? I think so much of this will be context dependent, and that AI tutor I talked about before might be perfect for a particular school, but be completely the opposite of what another school needs. And that's going to require the individual school to be able to sit down and say, here are the factors that I should think about before I decide whether or not to use the AI tutor. And that's what the book is hoping to fill in.
Yeah. And boy, there's so much going on. Would you recommend, because I was a parent that was very involved with my kids' school and I wanted to know what was going on and participate in, would this be a book that you would recommend for parents so that they can be part of the conversation?
Yes. So we actually have built out a set of parent resources to go with the book because we see a lot of parents are very interested in figuring out, making sure that their schools are making good decisions about how technology is used in their students' lives. They also want to be able to advocate in either direction. If your school is not using enough technology, they want to have the vocabulary to advocate for that. But also when they're afraid or they want to advocate for, data privacy for their child, or they want to make sure that, screens are not the only thing the student is encountering in schools. They want that infrastructure, for themselves to do so. And so, we've published some resources that help you figure out which chapters in the book are most relevant. How do you apply those, as a parent? Because parents are an important part of this conversation, and the book, because it speaks to educators, reminds our schools that I try to do I try to bring into the picture that we need to be very, very communicative with our families in our schools, because at the end of the day, a lot of this is dependent on family buy-in. And so, if you're trying to teach students healthy habits with cell phones, no matter what you do in a school, if they go home and it's not really supported at home, it's not going to reinforce it as well as if the parents are bought into it, right? So, or at the same time, if you just are making all these decisions about the tools that the students are using and how much privacy you're going to give up on the students' behalf and what you're going to tolerate, and then you suddenly get a group of parents who's really angry because they were never told in the right way, or they didn't really know what they were signing at the beginning of the school year. So, that's happening. We're seeing that in major school districts across the country. New York City's public school districts currently have a major group of parents that are really upset about how AI policies are being made. And that's not to name, one district. That is a trend we're seeing across the country, that parents are now starting to ask deeper questions, and oftentimes they realize they weren't involved in the conversation when they really should have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. One of the questions I used to ask educators, because I did educational magic shows, I would say, Priten, if this were a magic wand and I were to hand it to you, how would you use it to create the ideal school?
Wow. If I could only do one thing, I do think that I would make it so that everybody had built some basic understanding of education ethics. I think the goal is to get it so that we can all have these conversations and make the right decisions for our schools. And so while there's lots of things I would think would be amazing, I want to empower each school to make those decisions for themselves. And that requires building that knowledge, and ethics.
Yeah. We should tell everybody where they can go to find out more about ethical ed tech and find out more about you.
Yeah, so the website for the book is ethicaledtech.org, nice and simple. But if you also go to any of the major booksellers, you'll find the book at Amazon, Target, Barnes & Nobles, Audible, wherever you like to get your book. And if you just search my first name, I should come up pretty easily, but my website is priten.org, so that's Priten, and as in Nancy.org, and you'll find all of my work there, and including the book.
We've had a really fascinating time speaking to the author of Ethical Ed Tech. I think we could have talked for about a week. There's so much going on.
I think so, too.
Our guest has been Priten Soundar Shah. Hey, my friend, thanks so much for the book, and thanks so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by Atmosphere Press. Have you been dreaming about publishing a children's book, one that sparks imagination, creates bedtime memories, and maybe even becomes part of a family's story for years to come? The truth is, great ideas deserve more than a file sitting on your laptop. They deserve to become real books, beautifully designed, professionally published, and ready to reach young readers everywhere. At Atmosphere Press, you get expert guidance through every step of the journey, from editing and illustration to design, distribution, and marketing. So your book doesn't just get published, it gets positioned for success. Whether it's your first picture book, a middle grade adventure, or the story you've been carrying for years, now's the time to bring it to life. Visit atmospherepress.com to send in your manuscript and see what your book could become. That's atmospherepress.com, where your book can go above and beyond even your wildest dreams. Are you looking for a creative way to bond with your kids? Let me tell you all about Drawing with Your Kids, the ultimate destination for artistic adventures. Join us as we dive into the wonderful world of children's books with renowned illustrators guiding you step by step. From beloved characters to whimsical scenes, unleash your imagination and create cherished memories together. Whether you're a seasoned artist or just picking up a pencil, there's something for everyone at Drawing with Your Kids. Please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and click on the Drawing with Your Kids link at the top of the page and let the creativity flow. Drawing with Your Kids, where every stroke brings stories to life. Join us right now from the beautiful state of Maryland. Our guest is here today to celebrate her debut picture book. It's called Lily's Big Question. Please welcome to the show, Bobby Girl. Bobby, how are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have you on. Lily sounds a lot like my daughter did when she was a little girl. She asks a lot of questions and has a lot of confidence.
Yes. But that confidence doesn't come by herself. It comes from her community, especially her dad.
Oh, so tell us a little bit more about Lily, please.
Okay. So first and foremost, it's the visual.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. So, Lily is a curious little girl who asks a lot of big questions. And one day she asked a question that was so big that her father took pause. But not only did he take pause, he took care. He took care of her. And they say there's never any bad questions or dumb questions. That's what this father does for this little girl. He shows up big and he answers that question, and her community validates her father's experience, her father's answer. Her teacher even gets involved. I won't tell the whole story, but yes, Lily's Big Question is a good read for a lot of reasons and for a lot of people.
I'm curious, was Lily based on anybody that you knew?
Yes. Lily is sort of me.
Okay.
So when I was 5, my mom died of breast cancer.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And it's very hard to share this story, but having put this book together and sharing it with the world makes this easier for me somehow. You know, it's like a tribute to her. And when my mother passed away, my father raised me by himself. And some would say, oh, he didn't have any help. He didn't get remarried. No. And I didn't miss a beat. You know, I went to good schools. Excuse me. I went to good schools. I had a great family, everything. So Lily is sort of me.
Was this writing this book? You mentioned that it was hard, but was it also kind of healing for you?
Healing is a perfect word. Yes. And is healing. Not even was. Every time I share this story, I am reminded that God doesn't make any mistakes. And I always say that the story that I never wanted was the story I was meant to tell.
Sounds like your dad is a pretty amazing guy.
So, Jed, I can say that my dad was a very good guy. And he is still in my heart, close to me. But my father passed away a few years ago. And I am so happy that I had 30 years beyond my mother's passing to have him and to see him and to have a real model of an example, shall I say, of the type of man that I respect and admire.
So very important, and it's something that I don't know the percentages, but a lot of kids don't have.
Oh, well, I would like to challenge that a little bit.
Okay, please.
Yeah. And I speak from experience from the Black community because that's what I know well. And I stand firm for Black fathers because that's what I see primarily in my environment. So, absent of the data, you know, which proves that Black fathers are present, even though they may not all be in the house or married, they are present. And actually, if you lean into the data, you'll find out that they're actually averaging higher than other demographics. And
Really?
that's not And I love when people say really, because sometimes that goes unnoticed in the media and unchallenged with stereotypes. And that's the secondary, shall I say, joy when it comes to Lily's big question, because just showing a Black father with his daughter in this book gives me the opportunity to have this conversation with you and have you to go away with information that you might not have thought about before and say, well, you know what? This Bobby girl told me about the data. I'm going to challenge her and I'm going to see it for myself. And I guarantee you, Jeb, we can put it on our calendar. When you go and research the data, you'll say, she was right.
Well, I am not looking to challenge you. I didn't know anybody had taken data on that. And again, I probably was, I wasn't necessarily thinking of the Black community. I was thinking in general, because we have a lot of families that are not intact. And, but I'm delighted to hear that whatever stereotype that may have influenced me is incorrect.
Yeah. And we are a product of our community, first and foremost, right? I mean, we cannot help the fact that our eyes see differences, you know? Even though we say, oh, it's about your heart. Yeah, but first we see our differences. And so now that I've highlighted the Black community, I would like to bring in all men,
Okay.
And so men sometimes get a bad rap or are overshadowed by women. And the image that we put out there that women are motherly, and motherly means that they take care of the kids. They, soccer moms and carpool lines. But honestly, men are stepping up, and there is a real new wave, especially on social media now. Social media shows dads in all capacities. They're doing hair, they're doing homework, and it's like dads are saying, "Hey, we're here, we
Okay.
exist."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I certainly hope that my kids would say that I was there for them. We spend tons of time, and I know the relationship I have with them now that they're adults was built on hours and hours of reading with them and driving them and cooking for them and going to my daughter's dance recitals and being in the father-daughter dances and going to my son's football games. That's why I'm able to call them friends now that they're in their 30s.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that they're telling this same story to their friends and possibly their children to say that you were and are present for them.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me, are we able to let the audience know what Lily's big question is?
I would like them to find out for
Okay.
themselves.
Okay.
However, I'll share just a little breadcrumb that it's centered around her mom. It's centered around her mom. So she has a lot of questions about her mom. And I'll just bring you into my world as a 5-year-old. I had a lot of feelings and a lot of things were happening to me that I didn't have the words to share with people. And I'm sure as long as I wasn't sitting down crying, that no one was checking in on me, to see if she's okay. So I took the liberty with this book to kind of put some words to the feelings that I believe I had as a 5-year-old and that 5-year-olds will understand and resonate with. And if you don't mind, I'll just give you a story, a personal story. So one of the first children who received the book and had their mom read it with them sent me a video. And I still get chills when I think about this. The girl, she's 4. India is her name. And India never met her father because he passed away before she was born. Untimely death, he passed away. And when she looked at the book and she said, "Oh, she looks like me." And then her mother read the book and she said, "Wow, Lily doesn't have a mom, just like I don't have a dad." And the last page of the book, Lily says that being different isn't scary anymore. And that's because of everything that happened in the book, her community. And that little 4-year-old who sent me the video, she takes the book to school. She wants to have her hair combed and styled just like Lily. She is just so excited about Lily. And I think that's in part because she saw herself in that book. And that is very important to me. And when it comes to my why, that's my answer right there.
There you go. There you go. Well, we love the fact that books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And it's wonderful that India was able to see herself portrayed positively in the pages of your book. I love the fact that books can be windows and can give kids a chance to look in on other cultures, other kids' situations. Tell me, what kind of conversations do you think families can have about Lily's big question, and especially being able to see a kid who doesn't have both families in their life.
Yeah, so I like that this is a family book
Mm-hmm.
because it, like I said, first of all, it brings the child and the parent together. And another family who read sent me feedback that their children had a lot of questions after the book. And so that was just a conversation. And not only was it a moment for them, it's something that will last forever. You know, remember we read that book that said this and that. So that's one of the things. But also within there's a lot of social emotional learning going on in there. Again, I won't give away the entire book, but of course, I like to give some context to why it's important. There is a point within the book that a child doesn't really understand Lily's situation and calls it out in a way that makes her feel sad.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't know what to do with those feelings again. After she gets some coaching around how to deal with those feelings, she comes back and she shares it with others. And that same kid who once had, you know, he was so like, kind of rude to her, you know, because he didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
He apologized to her.
Ah.
And so that's another thing that goes on. When we don't understand what people are going through, or
Mm-hmm.
we don't understand the situation, sometimes we tend to put our own ignorance on it in a way that makes people uncomfortable. But when we lean in again to really share what's behind that and educate, there's an awareness that makes you soften, you
Yeah.
know,
Mm-hmm.
compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you always dream of being a children's author?
Not at all, but I can tell you that this is one of the most rewarding writing experiences that I've had.
Uh-huh.
I am recently retired and I am diving into a genre that I've never, I've never done before, but I'm so happy because now I get to create, use my imagination. Whereas in the corporate world, when I was writing for senior executives and technical professional documents, it wasn't really that exciting.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah.
So this is a lot more fun for you.
Oh my goodness. But I can say this. Children's books are much harder than I thought. I was thinking, oh, this would be great. Look at these pictures. What an author has to go through when writing for a particular age range is very, very, very challenging. You know, there's a part in the book where I wanted to introduce a concept, and I was thinking to myself, I know how an adult would say this, or they would understand this, but how would a child receive it? And it was that part as a new author that I had to really say, whoa, 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 let's take this back and think about this. So that was one of the challenges that I didn't anticipate when I was changing lanes, so to speak, with no blinkers.
You know, this you share with us that this was a very personal book, and that writing it was healing. But I'm curious, was there a part of the book that was especially challenging for you to share?
I don't know if there was something that was challenging to share. I I do know this, that I have to bring Kleenex to every every session that I have that I'm involved in because it brings a lot of emotion, and I still find myself crying, getting choked up. And it's not so much of the grief, but now it's about the pride, and also this knowing that I am giving something to the world, you know, and whether it be 5 people or 5 million people, they get to see a part of me. And my mom and my dad, their lives and their efforts and their investment in me are not in vain.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that you're sharing this with the world. Now that it is out there, has writing this book changed the way you see the world?
It's an interesting question. I haven't thought much about that.
Mm-hmm.
But in this moment, my initial answer would probably be, yeah, just a little. And I'll tell you why. It's changed it because now that I am in the lane of children's authors, I look at more children's authors. I look at more books for, I'm looking at it and I'm amazed at just how much is out there, you know. My son is 23, so I haven't been in the children's book section for a long time. But now I am, and these authors are amazing. The books are phenomenal, and I'm honored just to be a part of that. Yeah, so that's what the world is changing. It's changing my worldview of children's book authors and how we impact little lives and big lives as well.
Mm-hmm. Now that Lily's big story is out there and you've told this very personal story, are there more stories coming from you?
Absolutely. So I'm looking to continue this, and Lily will always have a big question. Whatever book comes out, there will be a big question, because I believe that children never stop asking questions. Mm-hmm. And actually, when we stop asking questions, then we stop learning, you know? So I always tell children that curiosity is your superpower, you know? And when you ask questions, you learn and you grow.
Yeah. Let's tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Lily's big question and find out more about you.
Oh, yes. So I invite everybody to visit me at Bobby Girl on Instagram and visit our website, which is www.liliesbigquestion.com.
Awesome. And Bobby Girl is spelled with an I at the end. And
yes, it's BOBBIGUIRL.
We've had a really great time speaking to the author of Lily's Big Question. It is the debut picture book from our guest, Bobby Girl. Hey, Bobby, thanks for being on Reading with Your Kids.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids. Will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. If this episode made you smile or gave you something to think about, and, I think Priten gave us a lot to think about, please consider sharing a link to the show with someone you love or someone educating your kids. That would be pretty important. Leave a 5-star review and, of course, subscribe to the show wherever you find your favorite shows. Connect with us, please, on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on X, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/readingwithyourkids, and our website, it's readingwithyourkids.com. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, please visit readingwithyourkids.com and click on the Authors Click Here button up at the top of the page to find out how you can be a guest here on Reading with Your Kids and tell thousands of Kidlit fans all over the world about your fantastic book. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful, starting with our guest, Priten Soundar Shah. Please be sure to check out Ethical EdTech Also want to thank Bobby Girl. Please be sure to check out Lily's Big Question. I want to thank my program manager, Chris Stardy. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better, kinder, more empathetic place. And you do that every single time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.